Good day to you all. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome from wherever you are located. I'm very delighted to welcome you to our UPM Raflatac webinar on EUDR, the new European Union Deforestation Regulation. If you are here, you have either already started to prepare your company for compliance, or you're wondering what it is all about and how it may affect you. With our webinar today, we hope to share information that will support you in your own understanding. Let's have a short look at our agenda for today. I'm here, as you can see, with my dear colleagues Sonja Murinen and Anssi Takala. Sonja is our responsible sourcing manager at UPM Raflatac, and she will introduce EUDR and our approach to due diligence. Next, I will have a practical look at EUDR based on the last months of customer discussions we've had on this topic already. Anssi, who's our development manager for operations solution, also heads the UPM Raflatac project on EUDR. He's leading the IT implementation and will share how UPM Raflatac approaches EUDR for the EU. Before we close, all three of us will be available to answer all of your questions. Please write your questions in the chat. You will find the chat in Teams on the top of the window that you're looking at, and it should open up on the right side. Feel free to share questions already during the presentation as they come up. Before I hand over to Sonja, we have a disclaimer on EUDR, as it is a legal requirement for the EU. The information we share today are based on our current understanding and interpretation of the EUDR. The EU has not finally answered all open questions, and things may change in the coming weeks and months. Please be aware that our comments refer to supply of label stock and other self-adhesive products to our direct customers. When it comes to our customers and the value chain further downstream, we recommend that you consider your own EUDR obligations when selling materials to your own customers. As it says here, we do not offer legal advice or consult on EUDR, and we recommend that you seek guidance also from the EU and knowledgeable third parties when it comes to your own compliance. But with that, let's get right in the thick of it. Sonja, may I hand over to you?
Yes, and thank you, Vera. And welcome all on my behalf to this webinar about EUDR. I will tell you a little bit about the EU Deforestation Regulation and our approach to due diligence. The reason why this regulation was created is that EU as a region is a major contributor to deforestation, even though its own forest area has been increasing. From the chart, you can see that the forest area in Europe has grown by 9% over the past 30 years. However, EU consumption remains a major global driver of deforestation and forest degradation. Global deforestation means deforestation taking place worldwide due to the conversion of forest to land of agricultural use, whether human included or not. Forest degradation under the regulation means the conversion of certain types of forest into other kinds of forest other than wooded land. It has been estimated that without this regulation, the Union's consumption and production of just 6 commodities alone would result in the deforestation of 248,000 hectares per year, which is equivalent to the size of Saaremaa Island in Estonia, or 2 times the size of the city of Rome. This regulation aims to minimize the EU's contribution to global deforestation and forest degradation, which are among the main drivers of climate change and biodiversity loss. The goal behind EUDR is important, and we fully support its aim to create a positive impact. We can move to the next slide. Okay, so here I'm happy to highlight the achievement that we made in the beginning of this year. All papers sourced by UPM Raflatac are now certified under a credible third-party forest certification scheme. Having all papers certified was one of UPM Raflatac's 2030 responsible sourcing and climate targets, which has now been achieved 6 years ahead of time. While certified papers help us comply with EUDR requirements, having certifications and certified products alone is not enough to comply with EUDR requirements. Therefore, certifications are not a green lane or a free pass when it comes to EUDR compliance. So the goal of this regulation is to halt and reverse EU-driven global deforestation based on mandatory due diligence. The regulation came into force in June last year, and we are now nearing the end of the transition period, which concludes on December 30th this year. After December 30th, it will be prohibited to place relevant products on the EU market or export them unless they meet the following criteria. They are deforestation-free, they have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of production, and they are covered by a due diligence statement. Annex 1 of the regulation lists all the commodities covered by the regulation, and for us, wood is the relevant commodity. I would like to briefly show you the different roles companies can have under the EUDR. For us, the most relevant role is the operator. Operators are responsible for conducting due diligence before placing products on the EU market or exporting them. Additionally, operators must create a due diligence statement in the EU's traces system. And this due diligence statement has a reference number that is then provided to our customers. But Anssi will explain more about this process shortly. Besides the operator role, there are also trader and authorized representative roles, but the responsibilities in most roles are quite similar. In order to comply with EUDR requirements, we need to establish a due diligence system as outlined in Article 8 of the regulation. We must exercise due diligence before placing relevant products on the EU market or exporting them from the EU. So, how to carry out due diligence? Firstly, we need to gather information as specified in the regulation. For example, trade name, full scientific name of the wood, and quantity of the product in kilograms, just to mention a few. Secondly, we need to conduct a risk assessment. And if the result indicates no risk or only negligible risk, we can proceed to place the relevant products on the market or export it. However, if the and higher than negligible, we need to implement risk mitigation measures. If after implementing these measures, we achieve no risk or only negligible risk, we can proceed to place the product on the market or export it. As I mentioned previously, we need to create due diligence statements in the traces system when selling goods in the EU or exporting them from the EU. Annex 2 of the regulation outlines the information required in these statements. There need to be information about the operator, also product information, including the CN code, trade name, full scientific name of the wood, and quantity of the product in kilograms. Also, there need to be traceability info, including the country of production and geolocations of the harvested wood. This information is included in the first due diligence statement created by the first player in the value chain within the EU. After that, the traceability information flows through the value chain via linked due diligence statements. So, in cases where our suppliers have already created due diligence statements, we need to refer to these statements when creating our own statement. Lastly, we need to confirm that due diligence has been carried out and no or only negligible risk was found. That was all from my side, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sonja. So now you've heard what EUDR is all about, and I've seen that questions have already come in. We'll address them in the end, as said. That's what it's all about and how we approach the regulation. I will now have a bit more practical look when it comes to labeled stock and other self-adhesive products. So what are things that you may want to consider yourselves when you plan the next steps regarding EUDR compliance? So here you see an example of what a value chain where UPM Raflatac is in the middle kind of looks like, with both up and downstream companies. Upstream, this is probably the shortest value chain possible with only 3 steps. The forest where the wood grows, that is then being used to produce pulp, which in turn is used for paper production. And the papers can then become part of a UPM Raflatac product that will resell to you. We are a manufacturer of labeled stock and other self-adhesive products. And while upstream value chain players have their own obligations under EUDR, it's not sufficient for us to refer to those players being compliant. We have our own compliance obligations, like Sonja explained before. And that's the same for the downstream value chain. As a customer of ours, you may convert and or print a product subject to EUDR, and your own sales transactions are likely also subject to EUDR compliance. It is very likely not sufficient for you to rely on our compliance and our reference number. But there are cases where the compliance requirement ends at Raflatac, and it may also end at you, at our customers. Straightforward example before we go into more details. Examples exempt from compliance are products not covered in Annex 1 of the regulation that Sonja just mentioned, so those CN codes, and we'll get to more details. And then secondly, products that are used as packaging, not packaging products or products intended to be used for packaging later, but when they are used as packaging. But let's have a more detailed look at exactly that. So, what are practical things to consider related to EUDR? Let's address a couple of topics on this slide. First, as a customer, if you, for example, print and convert labeled stock into labels, you may use the same or similar tariff codes, CN codes, tariff codes, and that we do then when you sell printed labels. And this indicates that you may have a compliance requirement to fulfill under EUDR. However, if a label is used on a package and the filled package is sold, the packaging itself may be exempt from EUDR compliance at that stage. As an example, think of a Raflatac shipment. The products you receive may be subject to EUDR, but the pellets which the products are delivered on are not. At least they are not when we use them as packaging. They are subject to EUDR further up in the value chain. When it comes to you, our customers, and also your own customers, for example, brands or retailers, we receive a lot of questionnaires that you forward. For EUDR, the EU system, the so-called traces system, as Sonja said, that is the vehicle where compliance is shown. And this is where the due diligence statements need to be issued. That's where they live, and that's where they connect to each other. We can share reference numbers to due diligence statements with you, and you may share those further if there's no requirement for you to be compliant. But basically, if you need to be compliant, you need to create your own due diligence as well, because we don't have a direct supply relationship with your customers. And we seek to provide the desired information under EUDR, but we would like to avoid building a duplicate information stream separate of EUDR requirements. With that, Let's come to the second topic, getting even more practical in the middle of it. Which products are subject to EUDR? Sonja mentioned Annex 1 of the regulation. Annex 1 gives so-called CN codes. CN codes for combined nomenclature. These are called also tariff codes or HS codes. And Annex 1 states those codes which are subject to EUDR. These are related to the 7 commodities Sonja mentioned, and the main one for Raflatac is wood. Related to wood, for UPM Raflatac, all products falling into the category starting with 4.8 are subject to EUDR. 4.8 is the category for paper and paperboard. And in that case, for example, self-adhesive labels of paper have a subcategory in that area. This also means that only products with a CN code of 48 will receive due diligence statements. These are typically materials made from wood fibers. So in label stock, it means materials with a paper face in the laminate. What that means in turn is that label stock with a film face material is not in this 4.8 category. The category for film label stock is usually 39 and thus not subject to EUDR. This is even true when the film laminate has a glassine or craft paper liner. The paper liners are subject to EUDR, but further upstream in the value chain. So as we buy those papers, for example, but not at the point of sales when we deliver film label stock to our customers, to you. So what you see here also are 2 exceptions related to EUDR. The first one, if material is used as packaging. In our understanding, EUDR does not apply. That was the pellet example I gave earlier. Another example is when a printed paper label is applied to an e-commerce package being sent, or a home care bottle of laundry detergent to be sold. In that case, there is an exception under EUDR. The second exception, if the paper is subject to EUDR and it contains recycled fibers, the EUDR does not apply. Recycled fibers are considered kind of born in the recycling stage, and they are not traced back to the forest origin. That would also be practically pretty impossible. If a paper contains both recycled and virgin fibers, the EUDR requirement does apply to the virgin fibers only. And with that, our third topic in this practical look. As Raflatac, we are building a system to share needed information for compliance with our customers, with you, when it comes to deliveries within the European Union, when we deliver into the EU or we deliver out of the EU. Ansi will share more details on how we plan to do this. For our Scarborough, UK site, this means that we will create due diligence statements when delivering from there to EU customers. We also plan to do the same for deliveries from Scarborough to non-EU countries like UK or Switzerland. However, the EU has not yet clarified whether this will be sufficient then for you as our customer, not in the EU, to import to the EU in the next step of the value chain. Deliveries from other Raflatac sites outside of the EU to customers outside of the EU are not subject to EUDR. And it's not possible to create due diligence statements in the EU traces system. If you are a customer, for example, in North America or in Asia Pacific, you receive products from UPM Raflatac, there might be EU involvement further down the value chain. But please remember the exceptions from earlier, 48 CN code and the packaging exception. If you see that despite this, there will be an EUDR compliance requirement, please contact your sales representative and share product details and case information. As this is the regulation from the European Union, not all of our global suppliers are ready to share necessary information if it's outside of the EU. So please get in touch with your main contact at Raflatac and we look at those cases. Phew, I'm sure it feels like a lot already with all this information. So finally, what are the next steps that you can now take, especially if you haven't considered EUDR yet, and you know that you have deliveries related to the EU? If you have EU-related transactions, we recommend that you consider identifying the CN codes of the products that you sell. Do they even fall under the regulation, Annex 1? Secondly, you may also want to clarify your role, as Sonja explained them earlier. If you determine that you have an EUDR obligation, then thirdly, you may want to consider how you can establish a due diligence system, especially involving your IT department, to work with the EU Traces system, much like what Ansi is going to explain later for Raflatac. And finally, you may want to create awareness among all of your suppliers, because there are still companies unaware of EUDR and they haven't set anything into action yet. So it's always good to then inform the upstream value chain of those topics. And now I have the pleasure to hand over to Ansi, who will take a look with you at the IT implementation of EUDR related to the EU.
Thank you, Vera, and hello everyone. I'll share insights of the EUDR related developments UPM Raflatac is currently running in parallel with UPM and European Union. Let's take a look at this complicated looking slide. On the left is the starting point of a multi-step supply chain where geolocations of harvested wood are recorded. UPM Raflatac is part of this chain where every step needs to do their own share in fulfilling the EU regulation. This means development in multiple places. Technical key for fulfilling the EU regulation is the due diligence statement, DDS for short, and more precisely DDS reference numbers delivered through the supply chain. Every link in the chain receives DDS references from their vendor and then uses received products with their respective references in production process. Raflatac will do exactly this. We receive the reference numbers from our vendors with raw material deliveries. And then when we ship onwards to you, we will again generate new reference numbers. The reference numbers are created in European Union tool called Traces, which is under development at the moment. We will call EU Traces from Raflatac internal mill execution system and request DDS references at the time of shipment to you. The call to Traces will go through a common UPM integration layer. As a result, EU Traces will have a complete link path from goods you receive from us to geolocations of harvested wood. In the example illustration shown here, Raflatac has delivered goods to a customer and created reference number 15 for the shipment. This reference number 15 has linked reference numbers 11, 12 and 13. Those Raflatac has received from vendors. And so path continues all the way to geolocations of harvested wood. Next, let's take a look of a high-level development plan we have. Turning the previous picture upside down, we have European Union at top. EU is developing Traces system as we speak. At the moment, we have access to a test system and the final production system is said to be available in December. One step down is UPM EUDR project, which is developing common functionalities for all UPM businesses, including Raflatac. For today's topic, most important is the API to Traces, which will enable us to get the DDS references. And last but not least, of course, is the UPM Raflatac project itself, covering the Raflatac specific functionalities. As with the two above layers, our build work is ongoing. First building blocks have been tested and we are moving onwards in development work. All developments share the same ultimate target and be ready by the end of this year. Moving on from this high-level timeline to a more details on Raflatac system development itself. Here you can see a Raflatac production site. You, our customers, are on the right. You have placed an order and we will produce the goods and send them to you. During the dispatching process executed in our MES system, we will call EU Traces through a UPM integration layer and generate DDS reference numbers. The reference numbers will be included into shipping list and shipment EDI messages. EDI messages are using PubInet standard and PubInet has already implemented necessary schema changes for EUDR purpose. I have all the time spoken about reference numbers, and indeed there will be two numbers we deliver to you. The actual DDS reference number and a verification number. You can see examples of those numbers in the box on the right-hand side of the slide. These examples are created in EU Traces test system and do not refer to any live case, but you get the idea how the reference numbers will look like. The shipment with two mentioned reference numbers is the visible part for you. Before that can happen, we have run through a normal material receiving and production processes. During material receiving, we will record and validate DDS references we get from our vendors. Validation happens through that UPM integration layer. Production process is the final block connecting both ends together. Needless to say, this is a very critical step. You can think it as an engine of the whole thing. We will continue using our existing in-house production data tracing. The tracing functionality itself does not require any changes. We will simply use what we already have. And as summary, we are working in multiple process touchpoints at the moment. Firstly, in receiving, to be able to record vendor-provided DDS references for later use, and in addition to recording, validate them also. Secondly, in integration to EU traces via UPM integration layer to get the due diligence statements created and DDS reference numbers available. And lastly, in dispatching to be able to send you DDS references with every shipment. Hope this gives you an idea what EUDR means to Raflatac from system development perspective. Target is the end of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Anssi. I hope we could already provide useful insights and information to all of you. We can now use remaining time to answer your questions. I see they're coming in plenty, so we're going to pick all of those up. As one reminder, if you haven't shared any questions yet, you can share the questions in the chat. You should use the option on the top of the webinar window with where you can open the chat, and then on the right side you can type those questions. Before I kick off the Q&A, I'd like to remind you of kind of the legal disclaimer from the beginning. So information we share today and we comment on your questions, of course, is based on our current understanding and interpretation of EUDR. We cannot offer legal advice or consult on EUDR, and we recommend you seek guidance also from the EU and knowledgeable third parties. And I can see that some of you asking the questions have already started doing that as well. So finally, let's have a look at the questions. I'm going to move the questions now in my view so I can see them. And then let me start. I will go top down now. And then, of course, feel free to add on. I think some questions we may have answered already through the webinar as well, but I think it's still good to repeat as this is such a complex topic. Sonia, the first question to you. Could you reiterate again, is EUDR kind of, how is it related to FSC and PFC? And do they still need EUDR compliance if certification is in place?
Yes, so the certifications help us to comply with EUDR, but it's not enough. So if you have a certification, it doesn't help much with EUDR. So basically, you also need to implement all the details we have described here. But when you need to create these risk mitigation procedures, the certifications will help you with those.
Great, thank you. And then building on that, Sonia, also for you, there's one listener that asked what sort of risk, and then another one that asked what is a risk and what risk mitigation procedures can be implemented. Could you have a take at that?
Yeah, if we want to go back to the slide 8, yes, if it's possible.
Yes, I'm going to do a quick jump through.
Okay, so here in the middle, you see that all the products that we place into the EU market, they need to be deforestation-free. They need to have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation of the country of production, and they need to be covered with this due diligence statement. So the risk is related to these 3 pillars over here. So basically, we need to make sure that the products that we are purchasing from our suppliers and what we are placing in the market, these 3 pillars are covered and there are no risk related to these. And about the measures, how you can mitigate the risk, EUDR, the regulation states that you need to gather information about your supplier and about the products and so forth. But otherwise, it's up to companies to decide what to do and how to check your own suppliers and mitigate the risks.
Thank you, Sonja. Let me find my chat window again. In 1 second. Now, okay, good. Then the next question, Anssi, I would like to share to you. Will you issue this statement for each supplied batch? If you could just kind of reiterate what you said on that.
Yes, simple answer is yes. When we ship out a batch of goods, we call it shipment, and you get the shipment paperwork, then that will include 1 DDS reference or, well, 2 numbers, so 1 set of these numbers.
Thank you. And that means per shipment, it can be multiple products. If you order multiple products, that shipment will, that DDS reference number will cover multiple products as well.
Yes, correct.
Good. And then the next one is now back to this is more verification of the DDS. So either Anssi or Sonja, how does your customer do verification of the DDS by UPM? So I'm not quite sure if it now means that how do we verify as Raflatac, or how do our customers verify the DDS? So
well, I can try to answer. I'm understanding the question so that when we send a DDS references to our customer, then how do they verify them that they are good? And I know 2 means. Either you log on directly into the EU provided traces system and check the numbers from there, or then you use a API call from your own system to the EU traces and use the functionality in there. But the verification is anyway, it has to happen in the EU traces system.
Good. Thank you, Anssi. So then the next question is, what if product is based on recycled raw material? Is it in scope of EUDR or not? So when it comes to recycled content, recycled fibers are considered born in the recycling stream, and they're not traced back to the origin of the wood. Remember that recycled fibers could also be multiple times recycled, and it's clearly impossible to actually trace that back. So recycled content is an exception from EUDR obligation. But if there's a paper that includes both virgin and recycled content, the virgin content underlies requirements of the EUDR as well. And then that's, I think, the question we probably most anticipated would be coming. There's information about possible postponement of EUDR, and do you have more information on this? And then I saw another one. We've heard that South American authorities and also German ministers have sent a letter to EU Commission to ask to postpone the introduction date for 6 months, and there's still no instructions published, and most companies are not ready. And that's a very fair question, and it's a question that we kind of ask the same way. We've heard probably the same rumors as you have. We have the same access to EU websites as you have. We still operate under the assumption that it's going to go live from the 30th of December, and we plan accordingly. But it may be that there is a postponement coming, but we just don't know. So we are preparing accordingly, and we also feel that while even if there's a postponement, it will only come later as a requirement. So the only chance that there is for us and also you is take more time to get all the ducks in a row, basically, to prepare for this. Then a question for Anssi. We've covered that, but let's take it again just to make sure. How will we receive the reference codes on the invoice line by EDI by mail?
Yeah, repeat the previous answer then. The reference numbers will come with the shipment paperwork and with the EDI for those customers where we have the EDI connection running, so both cases. And there will be 1 number per shipment. So as Vera, you were commenting already, if there are multiple products, then that 1 number will cover all of those products.
Sounds good. And the next question, forgive me, I will skip because that I think goes in exactly the same direction. I will later on also share the link to the FAQ that goes on our website that will also go again in the reference number and show also an example again of the reference number that was on the slides. So you will see that the reference number and then the verification number. And in terms of for the postponement earlier, so yes, the EU has actually promised to adjust the Q&A that they did earlier this year, but they've never updated that. And we are still waiting for those practical instructions from EU side as well. And I think there's now more pressure building from various governments and various associations to the EU to actually publish those rules as well. So what's the next here? What are obligations as a brand owner that is buying in an EUDR relevant material, but then sells a product that is not in scope of EUDR? So if you sell a product that's not in scope of EUDR, you won't have to do any due diligence, because then the due diligence, if that used to be earlier in the value chain, the due diligence stops before you then actually sell that product onwards. Depending on what the details are, you may consider a difference between EU or non-EU location of where you're selling from. Is there a need to provide anything? But if something's not subject to EUDR, you don't need to provide any details under EUDR either. Further down the value chain, you might get inquiries, but that depends a little bit on how the value chain then looks. Then in terms of traders, so now maybe Ansi and or Sonja, does a trader have to send data to traces if the HS code doesn't change when sending goods downstream? Or can a trader just copy the reference codes, the reference numbers that they get? I don't know if you can comment on that, if there's some insight.
Well, based on the information we have at the moment, then the trader has to create a new DDS statement with a new number and then link back to the number they received. So they cannot simply copy the number they got, but they have to create a new one with the link to the previous one.
Yeah, so even as a trader.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay, so then a very specific question related to chain of custody, I think. Will the DDS and reference number be mentioned on the chain of custody? Sonja, do you want to take a step at that?
Yeah, I can reply that the answer is no. Chain of custody and the certifications are a totally different thing than EUDR. So those are handled separately.
Good. Then Ansi, the next one I'll give to you. How do you deal with the uncertainties? For example, if geolocation and other information will need to be stored by downstream operators, and the person that's asking this said they received oral confirmation that will not be needed, but they're waiting for confirmation FAQ or guidelines. What do we build our system on? What type of information do we build our system on?
I think that question contains so many uncertainties that I can't even answer. So we probably have to come back to that in a later stage.
Yeah. Good. And then I'll share the link soon for the FAQ on our website, and that will be kind of continuously adjusted as well, also based on the questions today. Do we have a tool in place to generate fine DDS for manual dispatches, material returns, material samples, dispatches outside of the system, rough cycle dispatches? Ansi, I would also look at you for that.
Well, yeah, the rough cycle, of course, is recycled material, so it's not in the scope itself. The tools we are generating are for the dispatches, and we are intended to include the reference numbers into the documents we mentioned, so shipment documents and then the EDI messages including, but nowhere else. We don't have any other tools in the plans at the moment.
Yeah. And then, of course, for sample deliveries, they are also just regular deliveries. So there will be a reference number for samples under EUDR, and the material returns, of course, have always a connection from the ordering number to the shipping list. So we know which reference number a material return actually belongs to. So that's absolutely due to the traceability that Ansi mentioned earlier. And then it's a kind of very broad question. What is the verification number? Do you want to give an answer on that, Ansi?
It's a second part of the reference number that the EU traces or EU legislation has. The background and the meaning is not clear for us at the moment, and where it will be used, but that we'll probably find out, and at the same time as everybody else.
And then the next two ones I can comment on, even though that's the due diligence system, but with a reference number and verification number change for each delivery for the same item. So let's make it concrete. When I look at labeled stock, you buy Raflatac code RP51 honey glycine 65. If you buy that product this week and then you get it delivered again in a month, then yes, you will receive two different reference numbers because the reference numbers are issued shipment specific. And then the question after that is whether the reference number is the same for all reels in one shipment. And yes, that is. So if you buy 3 different products, they're all shipped at the same time, you get one reference number for that whole shipment. And that basically then connects to the whole upstream value chain. Then the next question, what is the use of the verification number from traces? Is that what will be matched with another DDS? I think we've probably covered that now with what you said. Anything to add, Anssi?
Yeah, that's, well, it's the verification number and the reference number, they together make the ID for the DDS statement. So that's all we know at the moment, and don't know exact meaning of the verification number itself.
Okay. I can just add here that most probably we have the verification number just to make sure that the due diligence statement number is valid and companies are not making those numbers up themselves. So you can actually check that the number that they have created, so the due diligence statement number, is valid by using this verification number. But yeah, we'll see how it works in practice.
Sounds good. And then the next question is, will due diligence statements be available for materials already held in our stock? I think we can also answer that, but Sonja, do you want to take that related to our stock material?
Sorry, I was not completely following.
Whether we issue due diligence statements also for material already held in stock. That's then for our stock and of course for customer stock as well.
Well, basically the materials that we have stock at the moment, we don't have the geolocation information, so we are unable to create due diligence statements for those products. But it's okay, the regulation says that all the goods that are already in the market are fine to be used, because of course EU also understands that it's really hard to, it's impossible to create the due diligence statement for the products that are already flowing in the market.
Thank you, Sonja. Then the next two ones I'm going to skip over now, just because it's also related to the verification number and reference numbers. If there's further questions that couldn't be clarified, please later on check our Q&A. And then after that, we can check if there's kind of additional info we can share, if there's additional inquiries that you have based on that. Will the today's slides be made available to participants? We won't share the direct slides, but we have the link later on that we will also post in the chat to our frequently asked questions, and all of the questions and more information is available on our website. So we're happy for you to access that, and we will soon send out also the link to the recording of today. December looks tight for traces coming on stream to issue reference numbers. So will there be any possibility to test the system before it goes live? Sonja, may I ask you to comment on that?
I think that Anssi might have a better understanding of when the traces will actually work, but I know that it will be a tight schedule.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I agree with the question. It definitely is. And I assume it's a development-related, system-related question itself. So yes, the timetable, not only December, but November, December looks tight. And the traces is under development. Like I said, we have access to the test system, and the UPM project is building our integration layer towards traces, but we will see how it goes. Some of testing activities, some mock-ups are in there already, but time will tell.
Thank you. And then does anybody know, or do you know if can companies still apply for access to the test system to also get familiar with it? Do you know that?
We have access to the test system, or actually the developers who are building the Traces API they must have, because they have been working on it already. How that happens, that I wouldn't know. We would have to come back to that. But probably the best information comes from the EU pages themselves or traces directly.
Yeah, and in our website that we're going to show you in a minute, there is the link actually to that to the due diligence system, and then you can get further information from there and inquire whether the test access is like additional available as well. The next question is, how are you going to validate the DDS from your suppliers? Is there any process in the European Union platform for doing it?
There is, or there is said to be. I mean, it doesn't exist yet, but in the beginning there was said that there is a functionality for validating the supplier given DD statements. The function wasn't validate; it was retrieve or something like that. But there will be one which doesn't exist yet. Linking to the previous question that December looks tight for the testing purposes.
Yes, absolutely. Then the next question is, will the DDS reference number be on reels of label stock? So to repeat what we said, there's going to be Raflatac is going to issue one reference number with a verification code that belongs to that for one shipment. So all of the shipment is covered by one reference number, not specific reels of label stock in that case.
Yeah. And in case this means that are we printing the references on a real label, then no, that's not the case.
Yeah, they will be available on the shipping list that also accompanies the shipment itself.
Yeah.
Okay. Are the DDS statements and reference numbers available, or pulp paper mill data available for papers currently sold or sold in the past? So I would say what Sonja just said before, as EUDR comes into effect, kind of in the value chain, we all have to wait as information becomes available. And as Sonja said, we can show that if the material has been on the market already in the EU, then they are then exempt from that info. And there's a question covering that as well, also in our Q&A. Anything to add, Sonja, otherwise?
No, that's correct. So basically, the answer to that question is no. We don't have the information for the papers that we are purchasing at the moment or that we are having in our stocks.
Yeah. So and then there's one listener that commented, I believe FSC are offering an add-on module for EUDR compliance, and that you may all look out for. I think both FSC and PFC and also other organizations are working on modules to support customers with working with the tracer system of the EU. UPM has chosen the way of kind of building our own API on the EU level and then using our own in-house systems to become EUDR compliant. But there are possible solutions out there that are being offered. How good they are, how useful they are, we can comment on that. But we can see that FSC and PFC are both further developing also their own certification systems now. Are label manufacturers fully exempt? No, they are not. So label manufacturer, UPM Raflatac, we are a labeled stock manufacturer, and our customers, you are then, for example, printers of labeled stock. And as long as the product that we sell falls under the CN code, so this tariff code in Annex 1, we are not exempt from EUDR. Of course, only for deliveries that actually are within the EU, coming into the EU, or going out of the EU. As a customer, what do we need to check when the material arrives, and where do we need to integrate the ID codes for each material? We receive scrolls and transform them. Is that something? I'm not quite sure what that means. Is there something that either of you can comment on that? I don't know, Ansi, if there's some comment or a comment on what we do in receiving material.
Yeah, maybe elaborate exactly that, how we do. So when we work with our vendors and we receive the shipments with multiple roles, then during the dispatch process, we will assign the received DDS reference numbers to the roles we receive, and then use them further down in the chain when we create the shipments to our customers. So you probably need to do the same.
Thank you, Ansi. Then is there a specific form of due diligence statement? Who provides it? So in the end, it's actually, so for example, the EUDR compliance obligation we have to create that due diligence statement in this traces database. And Sonja was in the beginning showing this Annex 2 information. So the EUDR regulatory text defines the information that need to come into that statement. And then it depends on the role and the part of the value chain where you are, what specifics you have there. But always the reference number refers to the upstream value chain details.
And I can just add here that basically the due diligence statement is the traces system. So you don't need to create a paper of your own and enter the information. You need to log into the traces system and then just answer to the questions that the system has. And from the system, you will get the due diligence statement and the reference number.
Yeah. And then Sonia, next question also for you. There's a listener that says, from my knowledge, FSC will offer risk assessments for more than 90 countries. Will those be enough for us to determine the level of risk?
I will add here that basically EU needs to create this country risk rating, but it has not been published. And probably FSC has tried to also create a list to help us to comply. But before the official list from the EU, we cannot rate the countries by risk. So that's the current status.
Thank you. And then the next question is, would EUDR concerns all countries or only import to EU? So the EUDR applies to all products that are subject to EUDR under Annex 1 that are put on the EU market. And that means they are either leaving the EU, so crossing the border to outside, coming in from outside of the EU to the EU, and that are sold within the EU, within the EU borders. EUDR cannot make mandatory compliance for deliveries outside of the EU anywhere. So deliveries, let's say, from Raflatac in North America to a customer in North America, there's no EUDR obligation on those. And another question now specifically, when I requested data from UPM about pulp and paper mills, due diligence for materials sold to the US being shipped in the EU, I only received tree species and country of origin, no more. Why? So relating to the question before this, right now, if you have a case that you get material from the US to the US, and then subsequently something is shipped to the EU, as I said earlier, it's possible that suppliers are not ready to share information that could then help with EUDR compliance. So we ask you to raise those cases to the sales contact that you have so that we can then look at those cases specifically and advise how to proceed, because the suppliers outside of the EU don't necessarily share the information that is needed to be EUDR compliant.
And I just want to add here that to be EUDR compliant, it doesn't mean that companies need to share who are their suppliers and so forth. So basically, the information about the paper mills where we are sourcing the papers, or the pulp mills that are selling the pulp to the paper mills, it's not relevant under the EUDR.
Thank you, Sonia. What about rubber-based adhesives? You mentioned in your presentation only wood as a relevant raw material. Sonia, can I give that to you as well?
Yes, this natural latex is also part of EUDR, and basically the materials that we are selling to our customers are these paper labels, and they are under these paper CN codes, and everything comes to the CN codes. Like Vera told you, it's good to check that what are the CN codes that what you are sourcing and what you are selling to your customers, and all the obligations regarding to EUDR are linked to these CN codes.
Thank you. And then a follow-up question on the verification of the DDS. The customer needs to do the verification of the DDS, that the information on the DDS is indeed correct. How does the customer get this from UPM? I think we've kind of covered some of this already, but do you want to reiterate either Anssi or Sonia?
Well, I can start the probably two things in here. The technical verification of the number itself, that it exists in the system, so that the DDS statement has been created and that number is against a valid DDS statement. That's the verification we are going to do when receiving. So at the receiving point of time, we will not be checking the details of the DD statement or anything in the further down in the chain, just the technical existence and that it is a valid statement or valid number.
Thank you, Anssi. And as a printer, all reels, pellets, packets already have batch making numbers. Will there be an API that allows us to work back from that number to get the full information required? Could mills consider a standardized number format so we can use a common system? Anssi, can I ask you to comment on that?
Yeah, when you have a DDS reference number, you can use that to get the information from the traces. The link from your number that you get from us all the way back to the forest and the DDS statements the guys who were chopping the wood out from the forest made, and that is generated in the traces system. So we won't be able to provide that to you. It's in the traces system, and if traces system allows you to go and look at the whole chain, then yes, it's available, but we don't know exactly what will be the final version of the system and what it will allow you to access.
Yeah. The next question, shall the due diligence be based on batch or item or supplier? Reference number wise, we're sharing one reference number per shipment. And then Sonia, is there anything to add about the due diligence conducted that we do? Because of course they are not specific to a delivery as such.
Yeah, true. Like I said, that EUDR doesn't give strict guidelines how to perform the due diligence. So it's up to companies to decide how they will do it. I guess that most probably companies will evaluate their suppliers once a year, twice a year, or something like that. And based on that, check that the materials that they are getting from the suppliers are compliant and the suppliers are following the due diligence processes also themselves.
Sounds good. Thank you, Sonia. So now looking at the time, because it's 3 minutes to 3 and we're cutting off at the hour. So all the other questions that are still in the chat that I can see that you want answers for, we'll look at all the questions from today and we'll rework and look at our Q&A online and then adjust whatever question hasn't been answered yet to share the information that you're asking for here. If your name is in there and we can identify you directly to a customer, we might reach out to something is unclear, but otherwise we'll rework the Q&A. And with that, I want to move to the very last slide because I do want to thank all of you for asking really great questions, for participating today. And thank you, Sonia and Anssi, for taking the questions and also explaining so much. All questions that we didn't have time to address are not lost. As said, we're going to review them. And what you can see here now on this page is that the upmraflatac.com/EUDR, that's where the EUDRs hopefully has gone live during this hour while we sat in the webinar. So that's where the FAQ document, not document, but the FAQ, the questions and answers are available. And we will adjust those as we get more information from the EU. And we'll adjust those also with the questions and answers that we've gotten from you today. If you do have more questions after the webinar, check out that website, or please also contact your sales representative. You should have a designated contact in Raflatac. Please contact that person for further questions. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.